Okay,
Morning,
so
everybody. I just want to welcome you all this morning to the Fingal FCYPSC launch of Back on Track, the Fingal Schools Toolkit for supporting students who avoid school. And thank you all for attending the event. And thanks also to our panelists, Mark Smith, clinical psychologist with CAMS and 2020 president of the Psychological Society of Ireland. Thank you also to Marion Horan, Education Welfare Service Manager. This pack is a result of lots of agencies coming together. So I'm just going to thank a few of those agencies. First, I'd like to thank Jigsaw and Dublin 15. Claire O'Reilly put a huge effort into bringing the pack together. I would also like to thank NEPS and Adele McConkey, who also put a huge effort into bringing the pack together, and Marion Horan, the panelist as well. We spent a good few hours over in Dublin 15 when it was allowed to do that. So just this morning, the running order is going to be that Mark will speak for 20 minutes, then there will be 10 minutes for questions. And I ask all attendees to the webinar that they use only the question and answer function. We won't have time to answer everybody's questions, but we will give the 10 minutes to it. Once Mark is finished, then Marion will take everybody through the pack, which will be really helpful. And we'll also have 10 minutes for questions and answers at the end. And again, just use the question and answer function. And then I'll just come back at the end of that for wrap up. So I'm going to, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Mark Smith.
Thanks, Anna. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me back on again. There's been slight changes from the image used for the poster where I had hair. This is a much more accurate version of my current state of hair on top. So I'm not going to get into too much around the actual pack itself. I'm going to leave that to Marion. I'll make a couple of references to it. So this will be kind of more of a general whistle-top tour of some of the reasons why young people will avoid school, and particularly focusing on anxiety, which would be one of the main reasons that I would see young people and parents. Similar to Una, just to say a huge thank you to everyone who put this pack together. It's a really, really useful resource. It's really comprehensive. And I think what it manages to do is to cover all angles, to look at the parents, look at the pupils, look at the teachers, and to really focus people's minds on the variety of different reasons that can contribute to why someone might be avoiding school. I think we've come a long, long way from the days when we just thought that kids avoided school because they were being bold or lazy or negative reasons why they wanted to go. So I think this has really contributed to that discussion. So I think certainly for me as a parent of 3 kids, I've experienced this myself. I just had my youngest start with primary school this year, and similar to some of the others, she has struggled at times to want to go, and it is hard for them. So I think it is important that we look at maybe anxiety and lots of other reasons as being maybe one of the contributing factors as to why kids might struggle with going back to school at different time points. So one of the things that I think this resource pack handles quite well is to give a multitude of reasons and to really make everybody think about what might be the contributing factors as to why someone might be avoiding school. And I think the use of the word factors is important, that we don't try and think that there has to be one single reason as to why someone might avoid, because often there's a multitude of reasons that all interact with each other. So for different children, depending on their personalities, depending on what's going on for them, they're going to have different reasons. For some, it might be their own internalized anxiety and worries about fitting in, about their sense of attachment, about being good enough. They might feel like they're the odd one out, literally the ugly duckling that's different from everybody else, and that anxiety magnifies that for them and makes them feel like they're very different. For many kids, it may be that they have some anxiety or they have learning difficulties related to their academic work. They might have undiagnosed dyslexia or other reading or communication, social communication difficulties that makes it an anxiety-provoking piece to worry about the academic demands of school. Bullying, as we all know, it's still here, it hasn't gone away, and that could be a reason that the young person avoids it because they're fearful of either it beginning or it continuing to occur. And for some, they just have a very attached relationship to their parent. They're anxious about the idea of separation and leaving mum and dad behind, and what might happen if they were to do that. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in a few minutes. Just to give maybe parents a break, sometimes this idea about being anxious about going to school is that parents are setting unrealistic expectations of the kids about their academic results, if they need to get 10 out of 10 in their spelling or junior cert results. In many cases with young people I meet, it's their own internalized view of needing to be perfect or wanting to be perfect, rather than the expectations coming from parents. So this idea, I've met many young people that would rather not go to school at all and miss an exam, rather than risk getting an exam result that they believed wasn't good enough. So 0 is better than getting 78 because it's not good enough for us. So with the kind of risk times in terms of this transition, it tends to be September and January when we see an increased risk in terms of young people maybe starting to avoid school. Because after summer, they're coming back, they maybe move into a different year, and the new teacher, they don't know what's going to happen. So what we know is that uncertainty is one of the main fuelers of kids when they get a little bit anxious, because they don't know what's going to happen. And again, in January time, where they've had time off with family at Christmas, and then they've got to go back and start all over again. So these tend to be time where we're more tuned into when young people might be avoiding school or feel that urge to avoid school, but it can occur at any time. They just tend to be the times where we worry a little bit more. I think one of the hardest parts, sorry, for me as a parent and from talking to other parents about school avoidance, is the impact on parents around their own self-doubt. When my child doesn't go to school or is refusing to go or getting anxious to go, what does that mean about me as a parent? How do the parents view me and see me in the line if my child is getting that little bit anxious, or what will the teacher think of me? And certainly I'm not immune to that either. And I think what I felt this month is a little magnified by it, because the school would know I'm a psychologist, and how come the psychologist's child is anxious going to school? And that's because they're human and they get worried and they get anxious, and it's okay. And it also means that you're not doing anything wrong as a parent. It means that self-doubt you're experiencing, that empathy you're experiencing for your child when they're distressed is a normal thing to do. I think it's also important to remember the things that would have been tried in the past that are not helpful, either for you as a parent or for the child who's experiencing that reluctance to go to school or the avoidance itself. Many of them are feeling an internalized feeling of shame, and shame is one of the most difficult emotions that any young person can experience. So what we don't want to do is make them feel any further shame on top of that for their not being able to go to school in that time. We also don't want to be given out to them. They feel bad in themselves, and if we add to that, it's certainly not going to increase the chances of returning to school successfully. We also know that the idea of, well, I'm just going to bring you to school and I'm going to drag you in the door, the idea of flooding a young person with anxiety when they're reluctant to go doesn't work. And if you want any proof of that, for those of you who might be a little anxious about the creature on the left, if you were to be anxious about that and we suggested I put you into a room with 100 spiders, do you think that would cure your anxiety about it or leave you with trauma? So we know that forced reattendance is not successful and won't work for anybody, parents included. It's also a question around self-doubt for parents of, well, what happens if I don't have the fight with them? What does that reflect on me? And again, just to re-emphasize that point, it's not about having the fight, but it's about finding the way that you can tune into what's going on for your child and finding the best way to support them, to feel understood, to feel validated, and also to find a way to help them to reintegrate. And I think that's what the pack is going to explain a little bit more, and Marion will go through in the next section of the talk. I think one of the important pieces for parents that you'll find in this pack is that it can feel a little lonely at times when your child is refusing to go, and that self-reflection and worrying about itself. But I think what this pack really emphasizes is that there are pathways and resources that you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to find all the answers. There are people who understand this. There are teachers who every single year will have a number of children who get really anxious or get really worried or have lots of reasons why they feel they can't go to school. So they will have understanding, and we have a very clear pathway as to how parents and young people can be supported to make sure that we get consistency and everybody is on the same page about a plan that we hope will help the child. One thing when we're dealing with young people and children who are worried about going into school, to us, it may not seem like the possibility of this is real. But especially for young children or any child really, the imagined worst case scenario is enough to make them extremely anxious. Even if the possibility of this catastrophic event seems highly unlikely, even the remotest possibility and the imagination of it is enough to make them anxious. And when they get anxious, we see that we get a very distinct physiological effect on the child. So everyone will be familiar with the upset tummy, or feeling a little bit sick, a bit restless, just difficulties with sleeping the night before, where they're thinking and worrying about what's going to happen, or reflecting on what happened that day and thinking that they were embarrassed by it. So more than any other issue that a young person experiences, anxiety has perhaps, I think, arguably the most direct physiological effect on the child. And it's not just the effect of having those physiological symptoms. When they notice those, it makes them anxious as to, why am I feeling these things? Why is my heart pounding? Why am I feeling a little bit nauseous? Which then further compounds that feeling of anxiety that they're experiencing. Alongside the physiological, we also need to keep an eye on the what if thoughts. And even for a child to say to them, can you tell me about the what if thoughts you're thinking about? And that gives you a sense of connection, that you're trying to understand it. Some of the most common ones would be, what happens if you're going to be late and you're not there to pick me up when everyone else is going home? Or what happens if you forget about me? A really common one that you may not think about a lot is, what happens if you die in a car crash while I'm in school? What will happen to me then? On academic concerns, if I get an answer wrong, or if nobody plays with me, what happens if I'm in the yard and I'm on my own and no one talks to me, or I have no one to say about lunch, or teacher gives out to me? Actually, one that I haven't included here, but I've spoken about in previous talks, is what happens if I get sick? That's a really common worry for a young child, is a sense of embarrassment, or they're given out to if they get sick. And whatever the what if thought that they come up with, it's really about engaging with them. Okay, then here's what the options are. So if you're running late, as traffic could happen, then you wait with teacher, or you get teacher to give me a ring, or you go home with your best friend's mom and dad and they'll give me a ring. So for each of the child's worst case scenarios, it's about talking to them, acknowledging it, and then saying, here's the options should some of these worrying things happen for you. So with worry and anxiety about going back to school, there are kind of three separate phases. One is the before. So that's the anticipatory anxiety, the worry about what's going to happen, the build-up. For me, when I was younger, it was hearing the Glenroe music. It was always, it's time to go back to bed because I got to go to school tomorrow. So for many, you'll see it just as they go to bed, you see the little brains, they're thinking, they're worrying, they're thinking about all the things that could possibly go wrong. And when they feel anxious, when they have those physiological effects, they completely believe that this catastrophic event will absolutely definitely happen. And I'm really worried about it. And what they do in that situation is they plan for safety. So they engage safety behaviors that actually maintain the anxiety. And what it usually involves is doing everything they can to try and avoid the situation. While they're there, if they have to go and they're experiencing it, the main thing they're thinking about is, when can I get this feeling to stop? Is it going to get worse? Is it keep going to go up and up? Will people notice it? Will they laugh at me? How do I get away? So they're enduring it, but with distress. And then afterwards, they think back on it and they reflect and they think about what they thought other people thought of them, how much people noticed, and then they feel another sense of embarrassment and shame over what they think they did wrong during that time in school. So trying to understand how particularly avoidance of school can become a problem. For young people, when we experience anxiety or any really strong emotion, it doesn't gradually make its way up nice and gently. It tends to shoot up really, really quickly. Now, for all of us, when we get anxious, we cannot keep getting exponentially more and more anxious. It always has to reach a ceiling. And when it stays there, if we do nothing at all over time, it will come back down. And you can prove this to a young person when you ask them about a time when they got really, really anxious, maybe even panicked. And what was that like? It was very distressing. And are you still anxious now? No. So that proves that over time, it will come down. But it is really hard in that moment for them to feel convinced by that. So what happens is when the anxiety hits, high point, maybe 85, 90, all that young person wants is to make that feeling go away, because it's distressing. They're flooded with thoughts about worst case scenarios. Their heart is pounding, they're feeling nauseous, and all they want to do is to make it go away. So then they do something and the anxiety drops and they feel better, and their thoughts slow down and all feels okay. So the next time they're in that situation, going to school, they think, hang on, what did I do last time that made my anxiety come down, or my feelings, whatever it might be, really, really quickly? And what happens is it's avoidance. So what they believe is that, thank God I didn't go to school because I would have got in trouble, people would have laughed at me, I would have got sick. They believe that they have avoided this event happening, when in actual fact, all that they have experienced is a feeling of relief, that this physiological feeling of my anxiety came down, but they didn't give themselves the chance to see that it would have come down just with time without the need for avoidance. So then that safety behavior of avoidance become reinforced as the primary mechanism to try and avoid feeling difficult feelings. So looking at what kind of things work, as always, in everything that we do, the relationship is the key piece. It's about having that one good adult that understands us, that understands our point of view, that validates the worry and the anxiety, and also is consistent, is there for us. So we know that fosters that sense of attachment and safety for a child when we have consistency. And that consistency comes from having that secure base, that relationship that I can come to my mum, come to my dad, or wherever it's going to be, talk about my worries, and that I will feel safe, whatever the worries that I have, whether real or perceived. Again, we've spoken this before, cannot emphasize the importance more of validation, telling them that it makes sense, that a new situation, that worrying about people not talking to them, worrying about being nervous or scared makes sense. And sometimes to validate them, say, look, it was a long time ago, certainly my case, but to say to my kids, like, I used to be scared of whatever the situation is. And they often look at you with wonderment and go, really? You were scared of that too? But also to name the feeling for them. And I can see how you feel. I can see you're nervous. I can see you're scared. I can see you're frustrated, whatever it is. And in that way, what we're helping the child to do is to self-label their emotion so that they understand themselves what it is they're feeling, because they may not always know. And really to recognize how hard it is for them, but also at the same time, to hold that boundary of expectation of we still need kids to go to school consistently. And that's the boundary piece. And I suppose with boundaries, what's really important is that once we set one, that we hold that boundary. If a boundary gets removed when a child gets really, really distressed, unfortunately, what can happen is it can set that up as a maintaining factor. So what the child will hear is that, okay, my distress gets to a certain level, then whatever this thing that I don't want to happen is going to be removed, which is really hard for a parent when you see a child in such obvious distress to feel confident in yourself to hold that boundary. If a child has been out of school for a while, it is important to preempt the return and to not underestimate how difficult that could be. In my experience of working with children, one of the things that they worry about the most is what's going to happen. Is teacher going to ask me, where have you been? Why have you been out? My peers, why have you been out? Were you sick? What was wrong with you? So it's important that we acknowledge that is an important worry for them, and that we get ready for the answers for whatever it is that we're going to say. One of the unexpected side effects of COVID, the positive side effects for kids who avoided school, is they had a ready-made story. Well, we had COVID, and most people accepted that without recourse. So it is important in working with schools to address that worry that they might have if teacher might ask, and to make sure it filters down from the year head or the principal to the teacher to not in front of the class ask, where have you been? That everybody is on the same page, and communication is going to be key in all of this. It is important to, sometimes I use a lot of humor with children, and I talk about them having the short-term memory of a goldfish, and that they look shiny thing and look shiny thing, and they've moved on. So you can acknowledge that yes, they will ask the question, and it might be news that you're back in school, but that they will move on to other things really, really quickly, and you may not always be the focus of attention and the focus of why are you missing school. When we work with children for a variety of different difficulties, one of the primary mechanisms that we use is cognitive behavior therapy. And cognitive looks at the thinking, it looks at the idea of how we manage things and what might happen. But in my experience, maybe only 10 to 15% of the benefit you're going to get comes from the cognitive, and 85% comes from behavior, the doing, because we can all visualize and think about what something might be, but we only get confidence from the actual experience of doing it and the experience of it was okay. Or the most important piece is it wasn't as bad as I thought. So sometimes after we get a child back, we don't want to go back and talk about the anxiety that they had beforehand and all the predictions, but it's actually really important, because what we want to do is undermine the power that anxiety has over the child by saying, do you remember all of the things that you thought were going to happen and how worried you were? Was it as bad as you thought, or did these bad things happen? So we're using that experience of the anticipatory anxiety, the predictions they make, and then the reality that they experienced almost always is not as bad as they thought it was going to be. which will build that confidence in their ability to cope, but also undermine the predictions that anxiety makes of them. So if a young person has been out of school for a while, it is important that you work with them, work with the parents, work with the school, to look at a means of graded exposure that allows them to feel a little bit of anxiety or feel more, to build their confidence in a stage-wise process. So each one is going to need an individualized plan that's going to allow them to work in a very progressive way towards back. So this is just an example of one I worked with a young person who'd been out of school for about a year and a half. And this started very, very, very slowly, but included doing schoolwork and following the same schedule, moving on to wearing the uniform, which the person associated with school, driving past it, and building up small bits, class by class, seeing the school being back in again. Each level designed to make the young person feel a little bit anxious, to cope with it, and to keep progressively moving back towards the aim of returning to school. Again, Marion probably will cover this in more detail, but again, the important piece for parents is that there are a variety of different resources, different support agencies that will be there, as well as NEPs and community partners that can be there to support and help both parents and the young people in managing whatever the difficulty is that's holding the child back from attending school. Thank you, and we'll open it up to questions if anyone has any in particular. Okay, we don't have any questions so far, so either that was really comprehensive and I covered everything, or people are still thinking. That's okay.
People are shy, Mark, and afraid to put them in, one or the other.
Don't I know, Una? Okay, so there's a question that's come into the chat about wondering where you draw the line and then go for external help. I think for me, one of the key pieces on that is if a difficulty is persistent, if it continues over time, and that it's getting in the way of children doing the things that they ever going, that they would normally do. What you're also going to find is that if anxiety starts about going back to school, it's unlikely just to stay with school. It could sit into other areas, like maybe anxious going on play dates, anxious going to their GA or their sports, whatever it's going to be. And in that situation, then we kind of think, oh, hang on, this is starting to spread. And we know anxiety kind of has a very contagious effect, that when children feel anxious and they avoid, it can be something that will move into other areas of their life. So one of the things that you could do, even just as a tester piece, is that our primary care psychology colleagues run parent advice workshops twice a month, where a parent can go meet with a psychologist for half an hour and check it and just maybe see what they think, get some advice about whether they might need to take some more support. But I think also to have those conversations, to talk to the teachers, to see if there's anything that the teachers can do within that environment to be able to support the child. So it's about opening up the conversation and not maybe struggling with yourself, trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. There's a question on, is anxiety among children generally on the increase? Yes, I would think so, but it's been increasing for a number of years. So we know, again, our colleagues in Jigsaw publish research every year looking at the most common reason for referral for the past probably 5 to 6 years, and every year it's anxiety usually is coming out as number one. I think COVID certainly didn't help that. And I think what happened with COVID is that people maybe who had no previous experience of anxiety suddenly knew what it was like to feel anxious a lot. So I think in general, I would say yes, that is something that is on the increase. Really good question about what if when a child just doesn't enjoy school. That is a reality, but I suppose we struggle as parents and within the system of, there's also the equally true reality of it is a requirement that they need to go, and maybe it's not about school in general and associating school with a negative place, but if there were particular aspects of school that they do enjoy. like a subject or a friend or something within a school tour. So what we want to maybe try and do is avoid getting into black and white thinking, where school is either good or school is either bad, that there may be aspects that they really don't enjoy or don't like, and we can validate that and say we understand it. But also make sure that we keep that there are going to be some things that they do. I think it may be also, depending on the age of the child, important to keep an eye on maybe is there reasons they don't enjoy it? Are they struggling? Might there be a language or learning or a communication difficulty, or maybe that there might be elements of bullying or something where they're really not understanding it. So I think listening to the child and trying to get a better idea of what it is that they don't enjoy, while also at the same time not engaging that black and white thinking of it's all good or all bad. Okay, so there's a question about would you suggest a secondary school year ahead try and put a plan together with student, parent, if the student has poor attendance and not yet refusal? I think flagging things early intervention is always important, because once a young person gets into a habit or pattern of avoiding school, then it's much more difficult to shift that. It's always possible. And I think, if nothing else, I didn't mention in the talk, but it's really important to have hope. That young man that I gave you the example of that plan with, he hadn't been to school in 1.5 years, and he had lost hope, his parents had lost hope, and trying to get that sense of hope back is really, really important. He's now in college and enjoying life, and reflecting back on maybe how his life might have been different if he continued with that. But I think, yes, identifying a problem early, having a plan is going to be much better than leaving it to get to the point where maybe they're refusing. So early intervention is definitely important. So there's a really good question here about the reassurance cycle. That's a really key piece in terms of what actually can maintain things for it. So we believe that when we give a child reassurance that it actually works for them, but sometimes what happens is they become dependent on the reassurance. So they're coming to us a couple of times a day, or especially with maybe older children, they have their phone and they're texting mum and dad from the toilets in school. I'm really anxious. It's gonna, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm getting really upset. Is everything going to be okay? So in those kind of situations, the anxiety itself is the maintaining. So they get a really short-term drop in anxiety from the parents saying it's going to be okay. But then the anxiety comes back again and they become dependent on that. So it's important as well to try and help children how to self-reassure. Sometimes what I've got children do with phones is for the parent to maybe record the reassurance that they have, and then the child can listen back to it themselves, so they don't need to always come to the parent to do that. Also, I suppose you can predict what the questions are going to be. And again, like I mentioned in the talk, go through, well, if the worst thing happens, then here's the options that you have. But again, instead of reassurance, lots of validation. It makes sense why you're anxious. I understand it. I get it. So the reassurance piece can be a communication tool that they're trying to tell us, and they're trying to make sure that we understand. There was a question about the parent drop-in sessions. Maybe I'll get Una to circulate those with the post-webinar email afterwards.
They're in the pack, so when people get the link, yeah.
Great, thanks, Una. There's a question about, is it beneficial to reduce the timetable for them to cope with coming to school? Certainly it is one of the options, but I think if you are going to do that, it needs to be for a very specified time frame, that it's not something that if they get a sense of relief from reducing the timetable, that becomes their baseline. So be really clear with a plan about, okay, we're going to reduce this subject and this subject for this period of time to allow you to build confidence, and here's the time scale that we're going to reintroduce it, so that they know that it's not a permanent situation. So I think in that, it's really important that it's drawn out, that it's visual, and that they can see it, and that they know that the plan is to reintegrate and to put back in those subjects once they've worked and got support to manage it. The suggestion is a question about for a young person who's not coming to school, but it's very difficult for the parents are not engaging either, or not responding to it. I think in that kind of scenario, it's probably more difficult, and it probably moves more into the realm of TUSLA in terms of trying to see if there are particular supports that the family, the parents, the young person need that will support them. I think you can make as many efforts as you can to engage via phone and letters, but if you're getting no responses and you're worried about the child's welfare when they're not coming to school, I think at that point, the support of TUSLA would more than likely be the most important piece to see what additional supports. You probably would get the response from the parents that they feel like they're being judged or punished or reported from, but it is coming from a point of view from the schools of trying to encourage and support. If they're over the age of 16, then it's much more difficult, I suppose, because we know that the legal requirements are that you have to be until the age of 16. And I think even though that statutory piece is there, I still think that the role of TUSLA, because there could be some welfare concerns going on for the family and for the parents, and TUSLA do have a remit of the child protection and support and family welfare up to the age of 18. So I still think TUSLA would be the agency that may be able to provide those supports. So I think that's the time that I've used up at the moment, and apologies if there's any questions that I didn't manage to get to.
Great, thanks for that, Mark. Marion, you're next up.
Thanks for that, Una. Okay, just to go forward, I suppose, just to make sure that I really understand what I'm talking about today and the level of anxiety, my slides aren't working, so you'll hear me saying next after each one, and we'll move on from there, if that's okay. So today we're looking at the Back on Track, which is Fingal School's toolkit for supporting students who avoid school. And I suppose what Mark was just talking about there is that school avoidance causes high levels of distress for families and can be really difficult for schools to manage it. So we're really worked on this toolkit to make sure that schools have a way forward and that they can look at the resources that they already have within themselves to actually really steer this forward before it gets to external agencies. So that's really important for schools to know. They have most of the toolkit already themselves, but we've just put it together to try and help in the best way. So, sorry, I seem to have an issue here. Just bear with me for 1 second. So, okay, am I okay to go on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we will. So as Mark was talking about, early recognition and intervention needs to be coordinated by the school, and that they really are essential for a prompt resolution. I suppose good communication between the schools, the families and professionals is key. All the services from the Education Subcommittee of FCYPSC came together to work on this, and we also involved young people. So you'll see throughout the toolkit phrases and quotes from young people on how they felt about school avoidance. So I think it's important that their voice is heard within this and that it's used, because nobody knows what it feels like more than those. We've really tried to put their view forward, and we hope that that's evident in the toolkit. Then the toolkit itself provides schools with practical guidance on getting started with interventions just within your own resources, and also on seeking additional support from external agencies. So we go next. So the toolkit itself is made into 5 sections. So you're talking about, we look at school avoidance, which is a general overview of school avoidance. And then information for schools, information for parents, information for students, and the appendices. So if we just take a brief overview of each of those, so we should be on the school avoidance slide now. So we looked at the language used in school avoidance, and it's really, really important that we're using the right language. You'll see we've moved from school refusal to school avoidance. You'll hear emotionally based school avoidance, and you'll hear a lot of different language used, but it's really important to make time to actually think about the language that you're using. We also look at life through a lens, and I think it's important when, to understand that school avoidance is difficult for all involved. It's difficult for the parents, it's difficult for the child, it's difficult for the school. And I think, it's also can be tempting to think that one party has more responsibility than another, but we don't. We all are in this together, and we need to be supportive, and we need to work together to actually come to a conclusion that will satisfy everyone and that makes it work for the young person themselves. We all want the same outcome, and we have to remember that. We want the student to attend school. We want them to be happy in doing so. Excuse me. And I suppose to remember that everybody's doing their best within their own resources. And everyone has a unique perspective, both on the situation and the solutions. So we need to look at that and take that into consideration moving forward. So the booklet will also look at what is school avoidance, what factors contribute to school avoidance, the functions of school avoidance, resilience factors that are there, and the link between anxiety and school avoidance, and then those triggers for anxiety for young people. And we also look at the aspects of anxiety. And then we'll talk about a lot of resources. We look at resources because there's always more information available, I suppose, out there. This is a very condensed version. It's a plan for a school to go forward, but there's always more information. So for schools, we have condensed the whole, what signs that may be observed in school, school-based programs that are already there that you can use, and interventions that you can use and you already have access to. We look at attendance as an overall capacity. And we also look at the school-based programs that could help, like SPHE, any of the curriculum that could help that you already have. And then we talk about the Fingal school avoidance pathway. Now, Mark already spoke about this, and this, I suppose, for us is the key piece of this toolkit for schools. It's a way forward. It's a way that we can work together to move forward with the young person, with the family, and with the school community in general and the external agencies. So I'll go in and I'll talk about that a lot more in a few minutes. And in that school avoidance pathway, we'll cover issues like how you gather information, how you use the checklists, how you look at each subject teacher and how that works, our first point of intervention. And then we talk about 10 days of school actively implementing the support plan. So I know Mark touched on having a plan. So we'll talk about that and where we go forward with that. Then we'll talk about the involvement of outside agencies and support services, and we'll give you a sample support plan. And then we'll look at the issue of special educational needs around this also. Next. So the information for parents, that's a smaller section. I suppose to remember that this toolkit is mainly for schools at this point. We do hope to maybe go forward with more information for parents and young people. So if anybody wants to get involved in that, please come forward. It has been time consuming, so I'll just give you a warning on that. It's a lot of work, but I think it would be useful to go forward with those points. So we look at what is school avoidance, the behaviors to be on the lookout for parents, because sometimes obviously, you know, there's sickness at the beginning. We don't actually know that it's school avoidance at that stage. And really, we just want to inform parents of what to look out for. So there's also tips for speaking with your child and your young person. And then there's practical supports that we push. And then we talk about when the difficulty does not improve, because it doesn't always improve. For students themselves, we talk about the outcome of non-attending school, the ideas that might help, and a list of places to get support as well. And then there's frequently asked questions. And I suppose that's information that the school themselves can give out to students, and they can give out to parents on that. So we move next. There's a big section in the appendices now, and this is because we want you to have the tools to actually go ahead and move forward with this pathway. So there's this school refusal assessment scale from NEPS, and that's for the parent and the child. And then we have the scoring and interpretation of the school refusal assessment, so you know how to work it and what to be looking for. There's also the NEPS documents on managing reluctant attendance and school avoidance behaviour, informations for teachers and school staff, and then also one for parents and guardians. There's also a step-by-step MEHL guide if we have to go for a MEHL. And then there's also the HSE psychology advice clinics that Mark was talking about. So that information is in the pack already there for you. And then there's a list of useful contacts, and there's further reading. Now there will be further reading forevermore, because I as Mark sort of alluded to there, it is becoming more prominent. We see it in schools a lot, you know, so further reading will always help and always give more advice and more information for us. So I hope that gives an overall view of what's in the pack in general. And now I just want to talk to you about the Fingal School Avoidance Pathway itself. So a pathway is included to help the schools to plan and review their interventions. The pathway, I suppose, itself recognises the importance of early intervention and the key role a school has. And a school can identify and intervene in all these issues, and they can intervene at a really early stage. And I suppose the purpose of the pathway is to guide schools on how to progress with early intervention and what to do if this intervention isn't working and when to ask for professional support, I suppose. And I'd just like to say the strategies, suggestions in the toolkit are not exhaustive, but it is hoped that they'll provide some guidance and support to teachers, students, and parents. Okay, so we're talking about as soon as the school becomes aware that a student has experienced school avoidance, interventions should be planned and implemented in a timely manner to support their return to school. And I say as soon as they become aware that it is school avoidance, because as I've said previously, sometimes it can be, oh, I don't feel well on that day. Or you'll know the school themselves will notice a child that's always trying to go home early and sitting in sick bay or sitting outside the principal's office waiting for a parent to collect them. And it might not be obvious at the beginning that it's school avoidance, but as soon as that is identified, it's important to act quickly, you know, and implement a plan. So I suppose the pathway is intended to guide schools with planning and reviewing early school-based interventions and deciding if and when and which professional supports are required, because we're not always needed at first. The school have a lot more information and a lot more to add to this before we get involved, I suppose. And as I said, the pathway is not necessarily linear. Not all steps will be necessarily appropriate in every case. You can jump from one step to three, or you can go step by step, whichever suits that actual plan at that time. So once school avoidance is identified as a concern by parents and guardians or school, I suppose when the student is identified as having difficulties in attending school, it's imperative to implement interventions as soon as possible. The steps will assist schools, parents, and young people in building a robust pathway to the return to school. So just to identify it is a step in itself. And I think that's hugely important, because I know at the end of the year, sometimes we get referrals in to the Education Welfare Service where a child has missed around 98 days and nobody has told us and nobody has informed us and nobody has identified it as school avoidance. So actually being on the lookout is key for schools to do that. Look for it, identify it as soon as you can. And either the school can identify it or the parent or the guardian might have an idea themselves. So once that happens, the school then need to identify a staff member to act as a key school contact between the key stakeholders. So that person, it's important to have one key contact so the parents know exactly who they need to talk to. The young person knows who they need to contact, and external agencies or any other service that's involved its family can go to one person. That one key contact in school will hold all this information and they'll identify strengths, weaknesses, and things like that. And they'll know what part of the plan we're at. So it's really important that a school do that as soon as possible. Excuse me, I'll just take a drink. So next. Okay, so once that key stakeholder is identified among the school, they need to arrange a meeting with all the key stakeholders to gather information and discuss the concerns collaboratively. They should make arrangements to meet with stakeholders. The key objective of this meeting will be to try and identify the cause of the school avoidance or any specific barriers around returning to school. I suppose we have included a school and parent checklist in the toolkit to help with this. And there's a broader outline of what further information you should be gathering at this meeting in the toolkit. I'm not going to go into it all now. There's also a school refusal assessment scale, and that will help you work with the parents and the child. And I suppose while it's important to gather information from all of those, some of the most important information to gather is from within the school themselves. So look at the strengths of the student in school, the difficulties. Is there an issue around friendships? Can anything be done with that? Look at academic ability, maybe that's a barrier, and what current supports can be offered. And NEPS, all NEPS documents will help. They'll help with forming a plan, and that's where we go now. So we'll have met, we'll have discussed the concerns collaboratively, sorry. And then the next part is to actually make a plan. So we know the concerns, we've discussed them, we've identified that this is school avoidance, we have a key personnel there, and then we meet with the parents, the guardians, the student, and important stakeholders to see what is the plan that we have moving forward. Okay, so we look at the areas of need, what the school can do, what they will target, how they can support. Again, NEPS's resources are already there, they're in the toolkit, you have them in the school. So things like managing reluctant attendance and school avoidance behavior information for teachers and school staff is there. And it helps to show you how to plan an intervention and how to have that meeting. So it's important that you use the resources that are already there. You identify barriers and they should be addressed, you know, such as learning or social needs, and they should be in the plan, how we can try and overcome those. And the school should also advise the parents on what they can do at home. So there are, as we went through the contents of the toolkit there, you can see that there's information for parents on what home should look like. And Mark mentioned a few of them, like being in the uniform, getting ready for school, have the expectation that they go to school, you know, and strategies that parents can use. So schools can give these out to the parents at the time. A plan of intervention then should be agreed with the student, their parents, the guardians, and the school. And there's sample support plan in the toolkit for you to use. And then that agreed plan should be recorded in the student support file, and we set a review date. Now at this stage, you probably as a school, you will be consulting with NEPS. You can also talk to your EWO about your concerns at this stage. They'll have a lot of information, advice, to give you at this point. At this point, I would say there's probably no need for a referral just yet. It's more about an informal contact and getting that information. Obviously, you could also maybe identify needs in the plan and the strengths there, and to see what that young person needs. So maybe a possible referral to Jigsaw, cross care, primary care psychology, or even your local youth service to help out at this stage. And I suppose build services around the young person to help them get through this plan. And then maybe a possible referral to PPFS as well, and maybe a MEHAL if needed. Now we have the plan. So we've identified the issue. We've identified a key contact in the school. We have a plan to go forward. We need to implement this plan for 10 days. So we're 10 school days of actively implementing and agreed the plan at home and in school. So this will mean that relevant school staff and teachers should be briefed about the support plan and what the agreed supports are and who they're being implemented by. And then obviously NEPS have more information around this, managing reluctant attendance and school avoidance. Any additional support strategies that were named in the plan should be implemented as soon as the student begins the return to school. So don't wait for them to be in for a few days to say, oh, we'll give a social skills program, or we'll do extra tuition, or if you're a DESH school that they'll have work with school, they'll have meetings with school completion. Do it from day one. Try and get those extra resources and support strategies in place from day one. The more they're in place, the better there's chance of succeeding. There may also be a friend that they have in school, so identify that friend, see if they can work as a buddy. Identify maybe a supervised space where they could go for the student to attend during periods where they feel they can't stay in school. And I suppose the aim is to encourage them to remain in school rather than leave. Even though their anxiety levels are high, We want to actually make them feel safe in school and that there is a place to go to. And then when those anxiety levels go down again, that they can return to class and not just have gone home. So I think it's really important if we have that. Not all schools will have that space, but if they do, that would be great. And then I suppose, if possible at all, a designated staff member, maybe again, if it's a DESH school, a school completion worker or a care staff team would be there for the child, for the young person, you know, that they could go to. Simple things like break cards. So if they need to leave the class, they can leave. Yet if they meet another teacher in the hallway, instead of building that anxiety within them around the questions of, oh, what am I going to be asked? We can actually just produce this break card that says they need a break from class and they're going to a specified place. And that's all it is sometimes. So when that plan is there, enacted 10 days, a review of the plan should be made after the 10 days, ensuring all steps that were implemented over this period actually took place, or the steps that were agreed took place. And I suppose when you're reviewing the plan, the strategies that proved helpful and were working well should be identified. And then the barriers that impeded progress should also be identified, and solutions to those barriers should be sought. In addition, I suppose, if additional supports are needed, then we can enact them in the next plan. And a record of all interventions that have taken place should be kept on the student support plan. So if that works, on the occasion that it works and there's progress made, sorry, next slide, if increased attendance or graduate return in progress, no one-word referral is needed. That does not mean that that support is to be finished. Continued support is to be given to the child and to make it, you know, feasible for them to stay in school. Now, I suppose sometimes, despite the best efforts of parents and schools, a quick return to full attendance doesn't occur. And we all know this, no matter how many services you put in or how many times you try, it just might not work. And that's a reflection of the complexity of the situation. It could be the home environment where the student and the parents require additional supports above those that the school have made available. The school may not be able to just deal with these issues. And that's when we're saying a timely referral to such supports is essential. So what you do is that you meet with the parents and inform them and discuss the issues that came about and why it hasn't worked. And I suppose you get consent from the parents to make a referral to EWS or TESS, and note school avoidance on the referral and include all the information on steps taken preceding the referral and information on the plan. And I say that as, you know, the senior educational welfare officer who looks at the referrals that come in. The more information in a referral that I have that the school has tried, the more I'm going to try and prioritize that. Because I can see that these efforts were made, they were put in, it hasn't worked, it's time for us to get involved. So if schools just continue to work with the child, work with the young person, continue to maintain a record of school-based interventions and identify any additional services for possible referral. Around moderate and severe mental health needs, the school are not going to be able to deal with that alone. So they just need to advise the parents to discuss it with their GP and see if a referral to CAMHS is appropriate at that stage. So when the other services are involved, when the referrals are gone into places, and I know there's waiting lists everywhere at this point, we do an action plan and have a date for a follow-up meeting set. It's really important to look forward and to believe that this is going to work. So set up a new action plan, set up a date for follow-up meeting with the invitees, with the new people who the services referred into. And then I suppose it's essential to keep reviewing this and changing, because needs will change, young people's needs will change, schools' needs will change. It should be reviewed on a continuing support on an ongoing basis. And hopefully at that stage, with everyone involved, we can actually come to a successful outcome. So I know I rushed through that and the slides are probably all over the place, but that's the way it happens sometimes. And I'm sorry about that. But I just want to say, the more that we work together, I think the more successful an outcome we can have. And the more we document what's working, what's not working, and really have a plan together. I hope it works. And look, we will work with you as much as we can. And I hope the toolkit, you will take time to read the toolkit and appreciate, I suppose, the work that went into it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Marion. I don't know if you can just take a look at the questions. There might be one question there for you around a person who's 16 who won't engage in school and the parents aren't engaging either. I kind of feel that you're going through the pack will probably have answered that, but maybe just take a look at that question. Okay. So the slides were great, Marion. They weren't all over the place.
Oh, they were not, sorry.
No, they were spot on. You worked very well with Abba to get them, so they were great.
I can't see that question. You want to read it to me, Una?
Sure, yeah. Your camera isn't on either. So
Okay.
The question is, have you suggestions around a student who won't come to school, but parent won't engage either? They're not answering the phone or letters, etc., and the child is over the age of 16.
I'm presuming it's not a desk school, so they don't have home school at that stage where, you know, in the school. I would say just keep trying. Write a letter. Sometimes, like, I know we've had a lot of success with a principal actually writing to the student and asking them to come back into school to discuss the issues that are going on. We don't have a legal remit in it with anyone over 16, so we actually can't really get involved at that point. But I think the school should continue to try as much as they can. It's very hard at that stage. Maybe a year ahead.
Thanks for that, Marion. There's a question about where you can get the toolkit. So I'm going to send a bit of work for myself before the end of the week. I'm going to send every school out a number of copies, so each school will get it. I'll also be putting it up online, and I'll send everybody out a link to that who has booked onto this webinar and those who have attended this morning. So everybody will be getting that. I think we're going to wrap up soon. I don't see many other questions in there, but just to say thanks to Mark for another excellent presentation and very succinct answers to the questions. Well done. Marion for taking the time to help us to digest the pack and for going through it thoroughly. It was an excellent presentation. For Ava for providing the tech supports. And to all our guests for attending this morning. As I said, we'll be sending the pack out to everybody and we'll be sending the link. The drop-in clinics, Mark has put very quickly put the link into the drop-in into the question and answers or the chat. And Marion referred to in her presentations to PPFS, that's Prevention, Partnership and Family Supports, and to MEHL, and contact details for those are also in the pack. Once again, just to say thank you to Jigsaw, to NEPS and the Education Welfare Service for the dedication to pulling this pack together, because it wouldn't have been done without them. Unless Marion or Mark has any final words, we'll sign out.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you.